Okay, good morning. We're in Hemshech Beis, and it's parallel in Tafresh Pei Beis. So Hemshech Beis, basically the bottom of page 1201 to the end of the paragraph of 1202, but we're learning it through the lens of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, in the year 1922, Tafresh Pei Beis, and we moved from the Nosei Maimer to the Baalescha Maimer. And it's chapter 62 in Tafresh Pei Beis. We reached to the point of the end of the paragraph on, for me, it's page 332. But the paragraph that I'm going to begin now is Omnam, Kol Zeh. So briefly, what have we learned? We've learned we're using the word spiritual health and a healthy state and an unhealthy state. So both in the physical sense, which is the example being used. What's health? Health is when the blood flow, the circulation, the blood circulation and the oxygen, basically the matters that give us life, the life force within us, is flowing smoothly and seamlessly through the body. There are no impediments, no blocks, no diseases. It's flowing. That's called health. What's lack of health? When there's an impediment, or there's some constriction, or something that disrupts the flow. And then you need refuah. You need healing to eliminate the problem, and also to strengthen the kilkel, the injury, or the damage, or the wound that took place whatever part of the body. Same thing is in Ruchnius. What he called it in a divine service. What is a healthy state? When a human being is aligned with the purpose of their existence, which means that they're attached, tovuk, just like the heart in the healthy state, the limbs and all the parts of the body are attached and connected in a seamless flow to the heart, the source of the blood and oxygen. So the same thing here, that we're connected to the source of life that a human being is living up to throughout the day. Whatever he experienced during davening, we're connected to that divine source of life, spiritual life. Is also spilling over and continuing on throughout the day, that all his activities are not focused on materialism itself, like we already described earlier. Person who's completely, what does it mean when you're controlled by and completely consumed and subsumed by the fires of the animal soul and its passions and desires? So here, on the opposite, you're aligned with that purpose. And when a person's in that state, he says he's betachlis habriyas ubeshlemus achayis. He's optimally healthy, and shlemus achayis, that energy, the vitality, is in its fullest sense manifesting within him. Okay. When Neshamas Yisrael through their Avodah, so Yisrael is called life. Torah is connected to Torah, that's called life. That connects to God, that's called life. Then you draw down Oyer V'chayis, the energy and the vitality, into the structure of the Adam Elyon, which is the spiritual supernal man in which we were created in the divine image. And from there, it ultimately comes down into Zah, Malchus, and all the way down below into the human being on earth and the world around us, that it's a healthy life and a healthy world. A world aligned with its purpose. Since Matan Torah is coming in a few days, 3,333 years from Sinai, from Matan Torah, that's what Torah came to do. The mandate of God, the blueprint, the life's operator's manual that's telling us what's the best way to be a healthy human being, a fully healthy human being, not just physically healthy, but also spiritually, emotionally, psychologically healthy. A healthy soul and a healthy body. If everybody followed that, that is considered to be the world of harmony, a world of Mashiach. And since we're talking about Israel and everything going on, this isn't just for Jews, this is also for non-Jews. They also have their mandate that was given at Sinai, which is the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, the moral code, the divine moral code, I should say. That's the foundations of every civilization. If we all live by that, we would have this harmony, a healthy world. A healthy world means a world without war and conflict, but inevitably, as the Rambam says. Or in the words of Yeshaya the prophet, when lo yareyu v'lo yashchisu b'chol har kachi, there will be no evil and no destruction, because kimala haaretz deis Hashem k'mayim liyam echas, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. As we've been learning, deis Hashem, das. Okay, that's the healthy state. But now we're going to continue omnom. And this is parallels what the Rebbe Rashab says at the bottom of 1201. He says, that's healthy, okay. Aval beheder aveda. That's how the Rebbe Rashab begins. The Friedrich Rebbe begins a new paragraph because he's, as we see, fleshing it out more, developing it further. He says like this now, that all that is when it's in a healthy state. Omnom, kol zeh, kasher kol inyoni aveda, misudarim ba'aveda kedebai. All this that we just learned is when all the inyoni aveda, all the matters of a person's service, meaning all our involvements in our serving, are organized and in a healthy way, in a balanced way. Ba'aveda kedebai. Misudari means organized in a proper and optimal aveda. Kedebai, properly and full and completely. So the Friedrich Rebbe adds that word. The Rebbe Rashab just goes right away because, as I said yesterday, Friedrich Rebbe is filling in and giving a little more substance here. Aval beheder aveda. That's how the Rebbe Rashab begins. But when there's a heder aveda, when there's a lack of this aveda, ubefrat. So lack would mean you're not doing this. Ubefrat, and specifically, kasher yesh eze ched va'avan. Not only you're not doing it, but you're actually doing something that's destructive or damaging. That when there's any ched va'avan, any sin or, there's difference, or transgression. Before we learned chet was from the word chesarn, lack. Oven is from the word ivus v'ikum, crooked, distorted. So he says, when there's any ched va'avan chalila, God forbid, hein besur merah, v'hein b'vasei tev. Remember the two paths. Sur merah means avoiding negative things, no avoiding bad behavior. And asei tev is doing good. So in either one, with the ched va'avan, which means you're either not following, not avoiding, refraining from negative things, or you're transgressing a positive mitzvah. Miskalkalim chalila evre hanefesh v'nechlashim akeches. Through this, God forbid, you injure, you wound, you damage the evre hanefesh. Because remember, we're talking now in the nimshal, we're talking the moral, the spiritual life. Just like an injury or a disease or illness would wound the body, the parts of the body, there's evre hanefesh. There's the parts of the soul that are now being wounded by this behavior, by either, like he said, lack of aveda, or any sin or transgression, and v'nechlashim akeches. So it's a wound, and the keches, the faculties of the soul, are now weakened. Just as we learned before, that when there's some block or there's some disruption in the blood flow, the circulation or the oxygen flow and so on, it causes also the same thing on the physical level, that it's a wound and a weakness, because as we said, when a person is ill, God forbid, it weakens them, it weakens the faculties. V'hainu, and this means, shemis'almim ha'ir v'achayis, that the energy or the light, the energy and the vitality are concealed. Remember, what we call chalishus, almost in a physical sense, something is weak. What it means in ruchnistic terms, it means there's a concealment of the energy and the vitality that's supposed to be going into the keli. It's now been concealed, or somewhat concealed, or completely concealed, all depending on the extent of the wound and the injury. That's on the level of the energy. But now he goes back and says, Miskalka, remember Evri HaNefesh. He says in Evarim we learned is like Kalim. So Upoig Mingam Be'Kalim Elyenim. And it also wounds the Kalim Elyenim, the supernal, the spiritual containers. Now, what does that mean? We learned earlier. Where did we learn that the kelim, Evarim, are called kelim? I think right in the last paragraph, right? I recall. Yeah, right there. He says, "Canal the Maila kelim ubedugmas ha'evarim." So let me just, before we continue, just to make sure it's understood clearly. In the human being, in the physical sense, it's easier to relate to. So I'll start with air, just as the Maimorim here are speaking using us as examples. You know, when you have the difference between a body and a soul, I mean, God forbid, you look at a corpse where the soul has left after Me'ev Esrim Shan, after 120 years, person death. What's the difference between the moment before death and the moment of death? Life means that there's a vitality flowing from the soul inside the body, which is general vitality, meaning giving it life in general, but also that it's also enlivening the faculties. The mind is working, the eyes are working. Talk about a healthy person, and all the functions are working properly. In very simple terms, it would be the equivalent of electricity flowing into an appliance or not flowing into an appliance. When you close a switch and the lights go out, what does it mean? The bulbs and the appliances that were carrying electricity, now the electricity is not flowing into them. When the electricity is flowing, you have both working together. Now, if you only had electricity and you didn't have light bulbs or appliances, you wouldn't have any benefit from it. It would be like there's electricity all over. On the other hand, if you have only the kalim, the containers, the appliances, and you don't have electricity, they're not alive. They're not energized. So the same is with the human body. The same is in Ruchnius. The way God created Seder Shtalshus, because he wanted it to make sense to us, he created Seder Shtalshus that also works that way, but there it's all spiritual. When it comes to a light bulb and electricity, the light bulb is a very tangible thing you can touch. My arms, my legs, my very body and your body are very tangible, and you see a life force within them. First of all, that you're alive from head to toe, as we learn Chayes Kloli, and then there's the Chayes Proti. The hands are working the way they should work, the eyes, the ears, all the faculties, all the chushim, all the keichus, everything. But because God wanted to make it in a way that's, we always talk about, in a way that makes sense to us, and we can climb the ladder. First of all, we can understand the process of how God creates, and we can then retrace it. So there's an equivalent parallel to our Eres V'Kelim, which would be our soul's energy into our faculties, or electricity into appliances, that's mushras, that's rooted in the words of the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of chapter 3 in Tanya, Nishtalshalu mehen. The 10 faculties evolved from the 10 spheres. So the 10 spheres also have Eris and Kalim. Actually, not just also, it begins there and it evolves into our being. I'm just going from the bottom up because that's what we can relate to. We look at ourselves, and from us, we understand higher levels of godliness. So the whole Seder Shtalshlus is structured Eris and Kalim. Even the highest root, the Kav and the Rishimu, is the root of the energies and the root of the containers. Even before the Tzimtzum, we talked about the Eir HaGvul, the Eir HaBlikvul, the Koyach HaGvul, the letters. Galif Galifu B'Tihir Ilah, God is envisioning existence. There too, on a subtle level, energy that reflects what God's interest is, and the Kalim reflect the structure he wants to create. Nothing in existence does not have Eris and Kalim. A sefer, a book, has letters on the page, and it has the intent and the content that are conveyed through those letters. There's nothing in existence that doesn't know how to have these two elements, whether it's called form and function, whether it's called body and soul, whether it's called matter and spirit. Everything has these two dimensions to it. So therefore, now, when it comes to Avodas Adam, as we learned in the previous paragraph, when a person is in a healthy state and they're doing their Avodah, they're not just mamshich. When a person, let's say, is doing a chesed, you're doing something kind. Gemilas chasadim. A gemilas chesed, you're helping someone. You're inviting a guest. You're visiting a sick person. Anything that goes in the category of chesed, you're giving charity. So first of all, what it does is, in your own personality, it draws from your nefesh's koyach chesed. It's like exercising that spiritual muscle called chesed in your nefesh, and drawing it into the keli of your heart and in your expression of chesed. So you have a healthy chesed. If a person, God forbid, does not do chesed, is not, what's happening is it's a muscle within their soul. A muscle, I mean, just figuratively speaking, but it's a faculty that's not being actualized. It's not flowing properly. But more than that, when we do a mitzvah chesed, we also are affecting the Seder Shtalshlus. We're drawing the chesed of the Eibishter into the keli of chesed in Atzilus. That's why I said ki'ilu asuni. It's as if you're building me, you're creating me. So obviously God exists, but our mitzvahs don't just affect us and the world around us, it also affects all Seder Shtalshlus, because we're drawing. Now, obviously, when God created the world, there's a chesed, gvura, everything is functioning. But then God said, I made you my partner. I want you now to draw. In the beginning, I created the world with chesed. Now I want you to do chesed. So you should draw the divine chesed into the keli of chesed, which in turn goes through all the levels, all the way down to earth. So in truth is, we're really affecting the highest levels and we're drawing it down. So essentially every mitzvah, every good deed, and of course, unfortunately, the opposite is also true, that when you do something, when you transgress, you're also damaging not just yourself, but all Seder Shtalshlus. So that's, I just wanted to elaborate a bit more to make this clear in our words here. So when he's saying that we say here, upoigmim, when you do an injury, in other words, you have either not done the avodah you should be doing, or you've done actually a sin or transgression, and transgression, besides the fact that you're misalmim, you're the oir, the energy, the divine energy is being concealed and not being drawn into its kalim and into all the way into this world and into us. There's also the thing you've done, you're doing damage to the keli itself. There's an injury, gamba kelim elyon, a pagam. A pagam is a blemish, really. There's many levels of pagamim. It can be a very serious wound, it can be a flesh wound, it can be a serious wound. So you're not going into the level right now. We're just talking about a pagam. Just like we said before with illness, it can be a complete blockage, or it can be just a diminishment or a disruption, as we learned. So now this is when things are not working well. Basically, what he's describing here is the state of the world when it's not in a healthy place, and the state of an individual, where there's a disconnect, a misalignment between who you are and what your purpose is. So therefore, in a sense, in the Evri HaNefesh and the spiritual level, there's a state of illness here. Cheli. Okay. So now we'll understand, even though these words we learned in Ayin Beis, and I explained it there, but I gave more explanation now. So he says now, Kiyadua, that the Kalim is not the Kalim in Atzilus or the Kalim in the higher worlds, they're not just passively sitting around and just as God's instruments. They're part of the dynamic process of our life. When we do something, we impact them. You know, the Maggid has a Torah on Hashem Silcha, that God is your shadow. So usually it's meant, okay, God is your shadow, like your protective shadow. But shadow also is a result, when you have light, light creates a shadow. So the Maggid teaches Hashem Silcha, that the way you move, that's how God moves accordingly. In other words, you control God's movements. So kol ha-koyre v'sheina b'teira, when a person is sitting and learning Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu koyre v'sheina kenegde, God responds. So it's like cause and effect, or it's a call and response. Action, reaction. And he has another Torah, da malamayla mimach. So in the Pirkei Avos it says that shleisha dvarim, 3 things a person should always keep in mind. One of them is da malamayla mimach. Know that which is above you. That's the usual interpretation. So in other words, be cognizant of God that's above you. But he teaches da mashalamayla, that you should know that which is above is mimcha, comes from you. You actually create the reality above as well. There's a story with Tzemach Tzedek that Tzemach Tzedek writes in a letter. I think I've shared this. It was the last night of the Alter Rebbe's life. Tov Kufay and Gimel Chavdalet Tevis, B'Tzoy Shabbos. So Alter Rebbe was in the Kfar, in the city called Vienna. It was a town. It was middle of the Franco-Russian War, and Alter Rebbe was running away from the front lines. So that weakened him. Bottom line is that was the night of his istalkus would be 10:28 p.m. B'tzoi Shabbos Chavdal Tevis. So Shabbos already, and even the earlier days before, people saw the Alter Rebbe was weakening, wasn't in a good state. He wasn't in a good state of health. So the Tzemach Tzedek was davening Ma'ariv at the Amud. Tzemach Tzedek was the Alter Rebbe's grandson, who the Alter Rebbe, of course, took under his wing after his daughter, the mother of Tzemach Tzedek, gave her life for her father. The Mittler Rebbe was not there, meaning the Alter Rebbe's son was not there with them. So the Tzemach Tzedek was davening Ma'ariv. Because of the situation, you can imagine his Ma'ariv wasn't exactly very besimchadik, even though it was still Shabbos, technically. But it was very depressed, and he sang it in a tone that was very down. So he writes in a letter to Tzemach Tzedek that the Alter Rebbe called him over after davening and said to him that I heard from my teacher, the Magid, that ma'kemad ponim l'mayla, that the way the face above is defined by how we show our face below. Kedmus mad ponim. In other words, if you show a sour face below, the face from above also shines that way. Kamayim aponim laponim, like the reflection, it reflects back to you that way. If you show a simchadika face, then God shines down with you simcha. This is what the Tzemach Tzedek writes. It's a long letter. It's a very powerful letter about how our attitudes change our realities. I spoke about it on My Life a number of times because he gives examples there. It's very, very interesting, very psychological letter. It's printed in Igris Kodesh of the Tzemach Tzedek, so it's easy to find. There are two versions of the letter. But this was probably the last thing the Alter Rebbe said, because then afterwards, the Alter Rebbe made Havdalah, and it says right after Havdalah, he passed away. It was his istalkus. This is the last thing he said. So this is just an example among many examples that we don't just impact our reality, we impact the reality around us, and as well as, say, the Ishtalshlus itself. So therefore, when a person, therefore, the Kalim, he says, Negeya Maisa Tachtenim. The Kalim above, in them, Negeya Maisa Tachtenim, in these Kalim. They're not indifferent or passive. They're directly impacted. The Negeya, the activities, the actions of Tachtenim, of our work down below. Okay. V'ayidei HaKalim, Magia Gam Ba'er. And through the Kalim, it also, the Begam, the injury also carries over into the Ur. I explained this at length when we learned Ayin Beis, that why doesn't he just say the Begam is in the Ur? Because the Ur really, when there's an injury in the body, for example, or a wound, the energy does not get wounded. It goes, it just doesn't have a Keli. So it retracts, it recedes back into its own place. For example, if, God forbid, someone has an injury in their eye, and they cannot see clearly, it's not the koyach hariyah that's been impacted. It's not the power of vision. It's the power of vision is unable. It's like the bulb has now burned out. The electricity is not impacted. And yet, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, this is citing straight from Ayin Beis, says the pagam of the Keli also affects the Ur. Here's not the place to go into what exactly is the effect, but there's definitely wounds also the Ur. So in addition to what he said before, that there's the Helema Ur, like the Ur receding, there's also something that impacts the Ur, but indirectly through the Keli. Because ultimately the purpose of the Ur is to go into the Keli. And when it doesn't go into the Keli, the Ur itself is also somewhat compromised. So it's like the Ur HaGvul sometimes. But if you recall earlier, we did learn that the difference between the Tzimtzum's effect on the Ur HaBlikvul and the Ur HaGvul was very different. And the Ur HaBlikvul, it causes the Ur HaBlikvul to be removed, recede, and we shouldn't feel it, but the Ur HaBlikvul is intact. The Ur HaGvul, actually the Gvul of the Ur itself is impacted. It's somewhat similar, not completely, because they're both are Ur, and here we're talking about Keli and Ur. But I'm just comparing it because there's some parallel there. Okay. There we go. Yeah, Magia Pgam Gamba Ur. Umizen Nasa, and due to this wound, Nasa, this causes, or from this is created, Minia v'ikuv, Minia a impediment, the ikuv and a block, shenechlash, that weakens, or shenifsak, or pauses, or stops, chalila, God forbid, b'hamshacha, hein lamaila v'hein lamata. So once there's now a wound, and that wound also affects the oil, what does it cause? That there should be something that's blocking, impeding, weakening, or even stopping or pausing the hamshacha, the flow, both above in the elam esalyan, meaning like the eris into the kalim, as well as lamata in our spiritual lives, the eris and kalim within our lives. So now, v'tzrichim refuah. So once you have this unhealthy state, and the alignment is not as it was in a healthy situation, tzrichim refuah. So now we need healing. Shehu, like you said before, davar charif v'chazak. You need something sharp and strong, something potent. Lahasir kol hamaniyas va'ikuvim, to remove all the blocks and all the impediments and all the blocks and the impediments. Sheyi hamshach v'hiluch ba'ruach chaim, to remove these blocks in order to be able to reclaim or regain the hamshacha and the circulation and the hiluch, the movement, ba'ruach chaim, in the spirit of life. Before it was the blood and the oxygen, but here we're talking in ruchnius, ba'ruach chaim. The chain. So not just that you want, just like the wound caused a problem both in the container and in the energy that is not flowing properly or not at all, and the container which is wounded. So firstly, you need the tshuva has to do both things. The healing has to do both things, rather. Has to correct it so you could have the hamshacha. V'chein l'chazek es evrei hanefesh she'yamshichu sa'er. And also to strengthen, if you remember, we spoke both things. It's not just enough to get rid of, let's say, that accumulation of blood and the swelling or the wound of the wound, but you also need to exercise and repair the actual aver, body part that was wounded. And here in this case, Evri HaNefesh, in order that they should be in a state, Sheyamshichu Sa'ir. So you need both things. Sheyamshichu Sa'ir, that they should draw that air back into a healthy state. So that's what we need refuah for. And refuah is not a regular process. It comes from it's a certain potency and strength that's necessary in order to achieve this healing. So now he's going to explain. Now again, all this is Ayin Beis with additional explanation here and there. And this healing is through tshuva. So now he's going to explain what tshuva is. This looks to me almost word for word from Ayin Beis. Hein tshuva tata, v'hein tshuva ilah. Both the lower tshuva and the higher tshuva. So this shouldn't be surprising new ideas because we read them already. He's now going to explain the difference between the two tshuvas and what each one achieves. But just, even though we learned this already, but in case anybody wants to ask something, let me pause a moment. If anything, need any clarity. Okay, we continue. Tshuva tata, the lower tshuva, who lamales habgamim ba'akelim. That's in order to fill the blemishes. Lamales habgamim, I just want to explain the word, because why does it say letaken habgamim? It should say to repair the injury or the wound or the blemish. Because the pagam created a void between the eir and keli. So just again, to use an example, there's an injury, God forbid, to any part of a body. Besides, there's an injury, but there's also now a void because the flow is not there completely. So Chassidus uses the word mole begamim because you're trying to fill back the void that is lacking. That's why he uses the word lamale sabgamim, because he doesn't just mean to repair the injury, it's also to fill back and give it back the energy, which of course is part of a repair process. So the pagam created an emptiness, like something is lacking, and lamala sabagamim is what tshuva tata does. Now, how does it do it? How do we do it? Here, somebody did something wrong. Somebody either didn't do their avodah or they did something that was a transgression. What's the process? What are you doing to correct it? It was done. You can say, you know what? The damage was done, and that's it. No. But the Torah tells us that we have tshuva. We always have. Nothing stops. Nothing stands in the way of a person doing tshuva. So what does the tshuva tata consist of? The tshuva zu ba aidemeridus nafshe. This tshuva tata, this lower tshuva comes, okay, something bad was done. It causes a pagam, it caused a wound, lamayla and lamata, but you're going to do something about it. You're not ignoring it. You're not just moving on. You're not in denial. What do? Is you go into a state of meridus nafshe, a sadness of the nefesh. Shemismarmer ma'id, where he's very saddened. I mean, meridus is really the word bitter, but it really means a bitter sadness, a bitterness. In other words, you feel real remorse. You're not like, people who do wrong things and they're completely oblivious, or it doesn't even bother them. There's no guilt, there's no remorse, there's nothing. You see this all the time, for whatever reason. Here, the person is showing sensitivity that yes, something wrong was done. I'm not ignoring it. I'm reacting to it. He is very embittered or very saddened by all his matters and all his behavior. Now, you could say, 1 second, isn't it just one chet? Why kol inyanov? Because clearly he's talking about a person who's living a sinful life, doing things that are not appropriate. So he's basically soul-searching and being introspective. This is what Shuv is about, introspection and accountability, and doing something about it. Umischaret aleim. And he regrets, and he has remorse over them, over this behavior. Becharota gemura. Not just remorse, but complete remorse, complete regret. Ala ovar, on the past, on whatever happened in the past. And the next page now, I don't know if it's the same by you, probably. By me, it's page 333 here.
It moved pages for us too.
Okay. Ubekabala v'askama belev. So we know tshuva is not just charot ala ovar. It's not just regretting or remorse on the past. It's also that you're going to do something in the future differently. Kabbalah v'askama belev, that he accepts and he resolves in his heart, b'chezek gadol, with great intensity or great commitment or great strength, asher lo yoshev l'chisla oid, that he no longer will return to this type of foolish or wrongful behavior. This is actually, I see below in the footnote, they say this is actually what tshuva al pi halacha and al pi chassidus consists of. Basic tshuva tata. So charata and kabbalah teva al haba, they will not return to this approach. As a matter of fact, the Rambam writes that true tshuva is that when you go back into the same situation that the previous time you transgressed, you wronged someone or wronged something, you don't do it again. That's the real proof that you did tshuva. Because if you just say, I regret it, and then you go back to the same situation and do it again, it's not true tshuva. That means that nothing was changed. It's like the joke or whatever you want to say. The person who's every Yom Kippur, he calls someone and says, I want to ask you for mechila. So the guy finally says to him, listen, stop hurting me every year and calling me every Yom Kippur, and then I'll give you mechila. You do every year the same thing to me, and then you call me every Yom Kippur like it's a mechanical thing. So the point is that tshuva means that you actually make sure you don't do it again. And you resolve not to do it again. That's tshuva tata. So what does tshuva tata do? It's what he calls the malis hapgamim. Just like in healing, in physical healing, a medicine or an intervention or surgery or something would get rid of the injury, would get rid of the block or impediment or the cause of the disease, and therefore allow the aver to start healing and draw the energy back into it. The same thing, tshuva tata does that. So in practical terms, if it's bein adam lechavere, someone hurt another person, they go back to them. Besides in your own heart, you really regret it and choose to not, you go, you ask mechila, you do whatever halacha says. In your heart and soul, you know that you really regret what you did, real remorse. You're first meridus, you feel saddened by it, and then you regret, and then you determine going forward, you'll never do this again, and you don't. That corrects the wound, that can correct the injury and the wound. Now, obviously, you could say, well, you need the mechila from the person. That's true, especially when it's banod l'chavere. Sounds just enough to speak to God. But speaking about the process all completed, yes, you can correct and going forward have a healed situation. Same thing, banod l'chaverim. Teshuva is having these feelings of sadness, regret, and resolution going forward, and that corrects and heals the wound. What about Teshuva law now? Teshuva law, as we're going to see, goes a lot deeper. It doesn't just deal with the wound, it deals with the root of the issue in the first place. So he says, with Teshuva law, Teshuva atzmis upnimius. It's a core level of Teshuva, upnimius, and internal, me'emek upnimius hanefesh, from the depths and the innermost part of the person's soul. Now, you didn't see that. By Teshuva Tata, it doesn't say you need to go all the way into the innermost part of your soul. Yes, you need introspection and you need sadness, but you could say it's a lot more behavioral and somewhat emotional. In other words, your lev is involved, but like it says in other places, it's chesenius halev, Teshuva Tata. It's your emotions, because your emotions are involved in the process, but it's not this innermost depth, in-depth type of core tshuva that he's describing now. Through this, he reaches into the atzmus. Atzmus always refers to the core essence. Now, this can be atzmus in our souls, etzem nefesh, and also atzmus in lamayla, above. Just looking at the Ayin Beis. Interesting. The Rebbe Rashab right away said, "Hu atzaika ma'umka deliba." The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say yet tzaika, the cry from the depths of the heart. The theme is the same idea. We'll see how he explains it, because he's going to, looks like he's, there's a lot more words here. Okay. Says like this now. Like it says, "Ma'amakim koresicha havaya." From my depths, I called out havaya to God. So ma'amakim. Number one, it talks about oimek, but since it's plural, it's talking about our depth reaching the depth above. So he's going to say that. Sha'idei hakriya b'tshuva b'bchinas ma'amakim. Actually, he's touching ma'amakim also in the avodah, not just above, as he sees here. That when a person calls out with tshuva from the depths, which is shahu, oimek le'oimek, not just the depth within the depth. That means in the innermost recesses of the soul. Hine al yedei zeh. Now through that, koresicha havaya. Hine al yedei zeh koresicha havaya. Through that, koresicha havaya hu keira umamshich es havaya. So it's not just he's calling to God; he actually calls and draws havaya. Shem havaya de le'ela shu atzmus erein sof shalifnei atzimtzum. So by you reaching into the innermost core of your own self, you also are able to reach Havaya, the highest level of Havaya, as we learned was B'Shamayim Mimal, Havaya de Le'ela, which is Atzmus Ein Sof, the core infinite Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Not the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum that is an energy that is going to Legalis Ela Elamus, that relates to existence, but the core infinite energy that we were talking about, the Eira Bligvul. Okay. So the Ma'amakim here is the Emek le'emek. Sounds like both within the person, and then you're also reaching the Emek above. Why don't you see the Lashon by the Rebbe Rashab? Okay, fine. It's a little different. The Rebbe Rashab says that our Eimek, we reach to the Eimek above. The Frierdiker Rebbe, if you look closely, says Eimek le'Eimek and doesn't say the word Eimek on above, even though it seems to be the same pshat, just pointing it out. And the Rebbe Rashab does he use Eimek le'Eimek?
No.
Okay, fine. Uksiv, Megala Amukas, Mine Cheshech. So this is he says below, it's a pasuk in Iyuv, yeah. Megala Amukas Mine Cheshech. So he's teaching like this. The idea Aveda Ubirer B'Cheshech.
Amukoi. Megala Amukois.
Yeah, you're right. With the vav, yeah, correct. But Megal Amuk is bin Cheshach. Yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab writes it that way. That through the work and the clarity and separation created in the state of darkness, which of course means the state when the animal soul was controlling the person and causing a concealment of the light and the energy, by working with that, by in other words, repairing that, elevating that, transforming that rather. So that's the word Megala Amukis min Cheshach, that through the Cheshach you reveal, through the work in the Cheshach, through that you reveal the very deep states, the deepest state, Shekeira Mamshech Er Atzmi. Because he's Keira. The word Keira, Karasicha, doesn't just mean to call, it also means to draw. To draw down the Ir Atzmi from this level of depth, Eimek. Sha'idezeh mismala kol abgomim v'nimshach refuah la'amachla. So this Teshuvah law now, this fills all the begomim, all the wounds and injuries that were caused by the inappropriate behavior, the damage done, the sins and transgressions, and you nimshach, and you're drawing healing lahamachla to the illness. Now, machla is the key word here now, because it's not just you're healed this particular problem. Like he says now, the machlu moker acheli. When you say machla, you don't just mean any particular specific illness, you're talking about the root of all illness. The ikar acheli hu tagberis ha'esh zara. If you really get to the root of the issue, why did the person transgress in the first place? Whatever that may have been. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came because of the overwhelming intensity of the strange fire and flame of the animal soul. Actually, one second, I may have to correct what I just said, because I'm going it based on what it says in Ayin Beis. Just give me a minute. Let me just see something. Interesting. In Ayin Beis, the language was like this. He says clearly that the mocker, the root of the illness, is the eish zar. The Frierdiker Rebbe is saying the ikra cheli hu tagberish eish zara. The primary illness is the intensity that is the overpowering of the alien fire. And the machla is the source of that. It's a little different than what it says in Ayin Beis. Not sure why he changes it, but that's how it's worded here anyway. So let's continue. The refuah zu, I'm going to read the whole thing and then I'll see how it compares exactly. It's more lengthy here. Okay. The refuah zu hu idei amshachas ha'atzmus dafke. Just one moment. Okay. This refuah is the amshachas ha'atzmus, which only happens through Teshuvah law. because you're drawing the core. Dafke. Ukameshe kosav. Vasiresi machla mekir b'cha. And I'll remove the machla, not just the cheli, not just the illness, but the root of illness from within you. The kashayeshna eza machla chalila. When there's, God forbid, any type of machla, illness, ubafrat machla pnimius, hakosha b'yeser. This is a Frierdiker Rebbe adding all this. And specifically, a very difficult, a very, trying to find the right word, not difficult, machla, very severe, a very severe case, a very severe illness, b'kamoi machla chitzenis, in comparison to a more external wound or injury or illness, in order to remove this innermost, this inner machla, hu eimer vasiresi. That's why he says, I will remove it. In other words, not a doctor and not human beings. I will remove it. Why? Because to heal on that level, you need to have amshacha from a very core place. And how do we get to that amshacha from above? That Hashem should say, Vasiresi, that I will do it. That requires a tshuva that's a very potent and powerful tshuva. That's it. And that's a tshuva that's very powerful and potent. And actually, with this stops where we stopped at Ayin Beis. The next section, even though it goes in the same paragraph by the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab, it's a new paragraph. So we're going to stop here and pay Beis, because this he covered what he said. It's interesting, this last section here, there are different words in Ayin Beis. He uses klipas nega, acheli ubchins klipas nega, ezar, machlo mokra acheli ubchins klipas nega, ezar, b'chteshi yasar samachla. Yeah, the content is more or less the same. It's just some wording is a little different. I'm not going to analyze why the wording is different right now unless I find something that's obvious. No need to belabor that, I don't think. But I'm going to stop here. So we stop here in the middle of page 333. We'll return to this after we learn the Ayin Beis further. So I'm stopping in the middle of this paragraph here in pay Beis. Any questions? Anybody? No?
Reb Simon, after people will talk about the questions, maybe you could tell us something a little bit about your understanding about what's going on in Artzena Kedusha.
Okay, first we'll stop the recording. Let me just say, anybody has any questions, or we should stop here? Okay.
I have a question. I have a question about the metaphysics of Teshuva, as far as getting a machila, kapara from the Eibishter. So, on the one hand, this is almost like a medical procedure that, at a spiritual level, that you just went over here. But there's no discussion per se of kapara from above, and I guess I'm curious to know, is that happening as well? I mean, and then that's part one. Part two is, what is, and I don't want to go too far astray. It's okay if you say it's too far astray, but what is the uniqueness of Yom Kippur that somehow enables us to do tshuva and get kapara in I guess in an easier way? Of course, we have to work hard on Yom Kippur. We have to work hard all through Elul. But can you explain what's the metaphysics? How does the tshuva, healing yourself, how does that create a kapara if it does?
Well, in both questions, I'm going to defer to saying it's not relevant to our conversation here at all. You know, there Chassidus. You know, Torah is very, as you know, vast. Their entire Maimorim that talk about both questions that you just asked, Kapara from above and Yom Kippur. Just keep in mind, since we want to state, as the Rebbe Rashab said, Chachma Bina on the reservation. The themes here, the Rebbe Rashab is not coming here to explain Teshuva and Kapara. He's coming to explain Havayu Elikim of Yadaita Ayin Vashavesa Levavecha. He's using this to come to understand how a person reaches these deeper levels of Blikvul above through their work of Teshuva below, because it all began with the healing of Eliyahu Navi, healing the destroyed or the desecrated altar. So though what you're addressing are good questions and important topics, but these are completely different Maimorim where I can refer you to if you wish, that talk about both Kapara, what is forgiveness from above, and what is Yom Kippur, and all the other things connected to that. So I just wanted to state that. So I'm going to actually stop the recording now because I wanted to answer your question in case